The Persian Gulf, a vast expanse of turquoise water shimmering under a merciless sun. Beautiful, yes, but beneath that deceptive surface lies a world of darkness, pressure, and death. For over 7,000 years, men have plunged into this abyss, not for sport, not for adventure, but for survival. They were pearl divers, and they were gambling their lives every single day for a chance at a tiny, lustrous sphere that could feed their families or condemn them to debt. This was not recreational diving. This was a brutal, unforgiving profession where a single mistake could mean drowning, where sharks circled like vultures, where the pressure could burst your eardrums and collapse your lungs. These men descended 50 feet into the abyss with nothing but a handful of simple tools, holding their breath for up to 4 minutes, diving 40 times a day, 6 days a week, for 4 months straight. How did they do it? What tools allowed them to survive in an environment that would kill most men in minutes? These are not just artifacts. They are the keys to understanding one of the most dangerous professions in human history, a profession that built empires, shaped economies, and forged a people. At its peak in the 19th century, the Persian Gulf pearling industry was a massive operation. In 1838, a British officer reported that the industry comprised 4,300 boats, with 3,500 based in Bahrain alone, employing 30,000 sailors, rope attendants, and divers. The pearls harvested from these waters were famous worldwide, prized by high-end brands like Cartier, and traded as far as India, Europe, and Venice. The shallow, warm waters of the Persian Gulf created the perfect conditions for oyster beds, and the pearls they produced were known for their exceptional quality and luster. But this wealth came at a terrible cost. Marco Polo reported that men were paid to charm the great fishes to prevent them from injuring the divers, a testament to the ever-present danger of shark attacks. Some divers reportedly kept diving even after limbs were bitten off, driven by desperation and the crushing weight of debt. The industry collapsed in the 1930s, killed by the mass production of cultured pearls in Japan and the worldwide economic depression. But for thousands of years before that, pearl diving was the lifeblood of the Gulf, and these were the tools that made it possible. Tools to trust. Skills that last. This is Bushcraft Arsenal. Number 1. The dhow, the pearling vessel. The dhow was the lifeline, the floating base camp, the only thing standing between the divers and the endless expanse of the Persian Gulf. These were not luxury yachts. They were working vessels, built for function, not comfort. The traditional pearling dhow was a wooden sailing vessel constructed with a hull held together by coconut fiber ropes, designed to flex with the waves rather than fight against them. The dhow ranged in size depending on the wealth of the nakuda, the boat captain. A small dhow might carry 40 men, while a large one could accommodate up to 150. The crew lived, worked, ate, and slept on this vessel for the entire 4-month diving season, known as Gauz al-Kabir, the Big Dive. There was no privacy, no comfort, no escape. The dhow was equipped with everything needed for the pearling operation. Looped ropes with stone and metal anchors were tied to the boat, ready to be used by the divers for rapid descent. The deck was cluttered with baskets of oysters, coils of rope, stone weights, and the simple tools of the trade. At the center of it all was the nakuda, the captain, who navigated the offshore pearl banks with an intimate knowledge of the sea that bordered on the supernatural. The construction of a dhow was an art form in itself. The hull was built using a technique called sewn boat construction, where planks were literally sewn together with coconut fiber rope passed through drilled holes. This gave the hull flexibility, allowing it to bend and flex with the waves rather than cracking under stress. The seams were caulked with a mixture of lime and fish oil to make them watertight. The mast was made from a single tree trunk, and the sail was woven from cotton or palm fiber. The Nakuda navigated using a combination of celestial navigation, dead reckoning, and an intimate knowledge of the sea floor and currents. He knew where the pearl banks were located, which areas were most productive, and which areas were dangerous. This knowledge was passed down from father to son, a closely guarded secret that could mean the difference between wealth and poverty. The dhow was more than just a boat. It was a floating community, a microcosm of the coastal society that depended on the pearl trade for survival. The success or failure of the season depended on the dhow's seaworthiness, the Nakuda's skill, and the cooperation of every man aboard. Number 2. The stone weight, the rapid descent tool. Time was everything. Every second spent descending to the oyster beds was a second of precious breath wasted. The pearl divers of the Persian Gulf solved this problem with brutal simplicity. The stone weight. This was a heavy stone, typically weighing between 10 and 15 kilograms, tied to a rope and attached to the diver's foot. When the diver was ready to descend, he would loop the rope around one foot, take 2 or 3 deep breaths, and leap off the side of the dhow. The weight would pull him down rapidly, plummeting through the water column like a stone dropped from a cliff. In seconds, he would reach the seabed, 30 to 50 feet below the surface. This technique was dangerous. The rapid descent could cause severe pressure changes, leading to ruptured eardrums and sinus injuries. But it was necessary. Without the stone weight, the diver would waste precious seconds and precious breath fighting against his natural buoyancy. The stone weight was the difference between a productive dive and a wasted one, between profit and poverty. Once on the seabed, the diver would kick the rope off his foot, freeing himself to move and collect oysters. The stone weight would remain on the bottom, anchored by its own mass, ready to be retrieved by the next diver or pulled up at the end of the day. Some divers used iron weights instead of stone, especially in deeper waters where extra weight was needed. These iron weights were more expensive, but they were more durable and could be shaped to be more streamlined, reducing drag during descent. The choice of weight was a personal one based on the diver's strength, the depth of the water, and the availability of materials. The rope attached to the weight was also critical. It had to be strong enough to support the weight and the diver, but flexible enough to be easily handled. The rope was typically made from palm fiber or cotton, twisted and braided to increase its strength. A frayed or weak rope could snap during descent, sending the diver plummeting to the bottom with no way to signal for help. Number 3. The Dyeen, the woven collection basket. Once on the seabed, the diver had one job: collect as many oysters as possible before his breath ran out. The tool for this task was the Dyeen, a woven basket slung around the diver's neck. The Dyeen was made from palm fronds or other local fibers, woven tightly enough to hold oysters but loose enough to allow water to flow through. The diver would move quickly across the seabed, his hands a blur of motion, grabbing oysters and stuffing them into the Dyeen. Speed was everything. An experienced diver could collect dozens of oysters in a single dive, while a novice might struggle to gather even a handful. The average diver brought up between 200 and 400 oysters per day, but this required 40 dives, 40 descents into the abyss, 40 gambles with death. The Dyeen hung around the neck, leaving the diver's hands free to work. This was crucial. The diver needed both hands to pry oysters from the rocks, to maintain balance on the uneven seabed, and to defend himself if necessary. The Dyeen was simple, but it was perfectly adapted to its purpose. The Dyeen had to be strong, but lightweight. If it was too heavy, it would drag the diver down and make it harder to ascend. If it was too weak, it would tear under the weight of the oysters, spilling the precious cargo back onto the seabed. The weavers who made the Dyeen were skilled craftsmen, and a well-made basket could last an entire season. When the diver's breath began to give out, when his lungs began to burn and his vision began to narrow, he would tug on the rope tied to his waist. This was the signal to the Seeb, the rope puller on the dhow above, to haul him up. The diver would ascend rapidly, clutching his Dyeen full of oysters, gasping for air as he broke the surface. The ascent was almost as dangerous as the descent. Rising too quickly could cause decompression sickness, known to divers as the bends, a painful and potentially fatal condition caused by nitrogen bubbles forming in the blood. But the divers had no choice. They had to ascend quickly to conserve what little breath they had left. Many divers suffered from chronic pain and disability as a result of repeated decompression injuries, a hidden cost of the pearling trade. Number 4. The nose clip and ear seal, the pressure defense. The human body is not designed for diving. Water rushes into the nose, floods the sinuses, and causes excruciating pain. Pressure builds in the ears, threatening to rupture the eardrums. The pearl divers of the Persian Gulf had to overcome these physiological limitations with simple but effective tools. The nose clip, known as the fitam in some regions, was made from turtle shell, horn, or wood. It was a simple clamp that pinched the nostrils shut, preventing water from entering the nasal passages. The clip had to be tight enough to create a seal, but not so tight that it caused pain or injury. Some divers carved their own nose clips, shaping them to fit the unique contours of their noses. For the ears, the divers used an even more primitive solution, earwax. Before diving, the diver would carefully pack his ear canals with earwax, creating a seal that prevented water from entering and equalizing the pressure. This technique was crude, but it worked. It was a testament to the resourcefulness and desperation of men who had no access to modern diving equipment. These simple tools made the difference between a successful dive and a ruptured eardrum, between a productive season and a career-ending injury. They were not sophisticated, but they were born of centuries of trial and error, of men pushing the limits of human endurance in pursuit of pearls. Number 5. The Kabat, leather finger protectors. Oyster shells are sharp, razor sharp. The edges can slice through skin like a knife through butter, and the rocks on the seabed are covered with barnacles and coral that can shred unprotected hands. The pearl divers needed to protect their fingers, and they did so with the Kabat, a set of leather finger protectors. The Kabat were made from thick, tough leather, often from goat or camel hide. They covered the fingertips and the first joint of each finger, providing a barrier between the diver's skin and the sharp edges of the oysters. The leather was soaked in oil to make it supple and water-resistant, and it was stitched with strong thread to ensure it would not fall apart under the stress of repeated dives. The Kabat allowed the diver to work quickly and confidently, grabbing oysters without fear of cutting his hands. This was crucial. A diver with injured hands was a diver who could not work, and a diver who could not work was a diver who could not earn. In a profession where every oyster counted, where every dive was a gamble, the Kabat were essential. Some divers also wore a simple cotton diving suit, a loose-fitting garment that provided minimal protection from the cold and from the abrasive surfaces of the seabed. The suit was not waterproof, but it offered a thin layer of defense against the elements. Number 6. The Oyster Knife, the pearl extractor. The oysters were brought to the surface, dumped in piles on the deck of the dhow, and left to die in the scorching sun. Once dead, the oysters would open slightly, making them easier to pry apart. This was when the oyster knife came into play. The oyster knife was a short, sturdy blade with a slightly curved edge and a wooden handle. It was designed for one purpose: to force open the oyster shell and extract the meat inside. The diver, or more often a crew member assigned to this task, would insert the blade into the gap between the two halves of the shell and twist, popping the shell open. Then came the moment of truth. The meat of the oyster would be carefully examined, probed, and squeezed. If there was a pearl, it would be there, nestled in the soft tissue. Most oysters contained nothing. But every so often there would be a flash of white, a tiny sphere of nacre, a pearl. The oyster knife was a simple tool, but it was the final step in the process, the moment when months of suffering and risk were either rewarded or rendered meaningless. The knife had to be sharp, the hand had to be steady, and the eye had to be keen. A careless cut could damage a valuable pearl, turning a fortune into a loss. Number 7. The dates and coffee, the energy source. Before each dive, before each descent into the abyss, the divers would eat dates and drink coffee. This was not just a ritual, it was a survival strategy. Dates are packed with natural sugars, providing a quick burst of energy that could sustain a diver through multiple dives. Coffee, with its caffeine content, sharpened the mind and increased alertness, crucial qualities when your life depends on split-second decisions underwater. The dates were stored in simple cloth bags, protected from the salt spray and the harsh sun. The coffee was brewed in a traditional pot over a small fire on the deck of the dhow, the rich aroma mixing with the smell of salt water and oysters. These moments before diving were brief respites, chances for the crew to gather, to share a moment of camaraderie before facing the dangers below. The energy from the dates would fuel the diver's muscles as he descended, collected oysters, and ascended. The caffeine from the coffee would keep him sharp, aware of his surroundings, able to react quickly to danger. Without this simple meal, the divers would have been weak, sluggish, vulnerable. With it, they had the strength to dive 40 times a day, to push their bodies to the absolute limit of human endurance. Number 8. The crew structure, the human tool. Perhaps the most important survival tool the pearl divers carried was not a physical object, but a social structure. The crew of a pearling dhow was a tightly organized unit with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. This structure was the invisible framework that held the operation together, that kept men alive in one of the most dangerous professions on Earth. At the top was the nakuda, the boat captain. He was the navigator, the leader, the decision-maker. He determined where to dive, when to dive, and how long to stay at sea. He received 1/5 of the total profits after deducting expenses, a substantial share that reflected his responsibility and his risk. A skilled nakuda could navigate the offshore pearl banks with ease, finding the richest oyster beds and avoiding the dangers of the sea. Below the nakuda was the seeb, the rope puller. The seeb's job was to haul the divers up from the depths when they tugged on the rope. This required strength, timing, and vigilance. A slow seeb could cost a diver his life. The seeb had to be ready at all times, watching the ropes, feeling for the tug that signaled a diver in distress. And then there was the gauss, the diver. He was the one who risked everything, who descended into the abyss 40 times a day, who held his breath for up to 4 minutes, who faced sharks and pressure and the constant threat of drowning. The gauss was the backbone of the operation, the man whose skill and courage determined the success or failure of the season. The crew worked together, lived together, and depended on each other for survival. This sense of community, this shared sense of purpose, was the invisible tool that allowed men to endure 4 months at sea, to face the abyss day after day, and to return home alive. The economic system was brutal. The Nahuda often financed the season by giving advances to the crew, money that would be repaid from the profits of the pearls. But if the season was poor, if the pearls were scarce, the divers would end the season in debt, forced to return the following year to work off what they owed. This system, known as the debt bondage system, trapped generations of men in a cycle of poverty and risk. Yet despite the hardship, despite the danger, the pearl divers persevered. They worked in pairs, watching out for each other, ready to help if one of them got into trouble. They shared their food, their water, their meager possessions. They sang songs to pass the time, told stories to keep their spirits up, and prayed together for a safe return home. This brotherhood, forged in the crucible of the Persian Gulf, was perhaps the most powerful survival tool of all. Conclusion: these are the tools that kept the Persian Gulf pearl divers alive. But they are more than just tools. They are a testament to human ingenuity, to the lengths men will go to provide for their families, and to the power of tradition and community in the face of overwhelming danger. The dhow, the stone weight, the Dyeen, the nose clip, the Kabat, the oyster knife, the crew structure. These were the tools that built an industry, that shaped the economies of the Gulf, and that forged a legacy that endures to this day. The pearl diving industry collapsed in the 1930s, killed by the mass production of cultured pearls in Japan and the worldwide economic depression. But the memory of the pearl divers lives on, preserved in museums, in stories, and in the hearts of the people whose ancestors risked everything for a chance at a better life. What do you think is the most impressive tool in the pearl diver's arsenal? Let me know in the comments below. And for more stories of survival in extreme environments, be sure to check out our videos on the Aleut sea hunters and the Shetland fishermen. See you in the next episode. Tools to trust. Skills that last. This is Bushcraft Arsenal.